There are some people who complain about the dumbing down of society, but their complaint amounts to a complaint regarding a lack of society adhering to a ideology, a lack of society adhering to a political dogmatism. So where they see this lack of allegiance or conformity to a political dogmatism, they declare that there has been a loss of education and intelligence because the individuals in society do not replicate this political dogmatism. To restore it, they want to see individuals adhering to, validating, espousing political ideology, and that is what they would consider to be a society that has an education. But that is not what it means for a society to have an education. What it means for a society to have an education is for the individuals of that society to have a critical capacity to evaluate information, and to evaluate information from a multitude of angles, to evaluate it for accuracy, to evaluate it in terms of whether or not it is manipulative, that it is trying to prey on the masses. Its education has to do with the ability to see through political ideology. It has to do with cultivating a critical disposition that has the ability to resist ideology, to resist conformity. The culture into which we find ourselves pressing more and more is a fragmented culture. This fragmentation of society cannot be espoused enough. It cannot be expounded enough. The fragmentation of society has to do with the fact that society is essentially broken up into sects, or we might say small cult-like formations, where individuals give allegiance to their particular sect. The problem with this is the thinking that creates this fragmentation. We have a situation where individuals have a lack of critical capacity. They are almost entirely incapable of evaluating information outside their fragmented structures. The individuals of today evaluate truth and falsehood in terms of whether or not an idea, a premise, a proposition, a belief agrees or disagrees with the narrative of their particular cult fragmentation, to the cult that they find given allegiance to the fragmentation that they are a partaker of. Everyone is adhering to narratives, and when these narratives are contradicted by critical thought, what happens is that individuals automatically assume that whatever contradicts their narrative must be false, because they have an inability and an incapacity to be able to think about things critically. They only think of things in terms of narratives. And the narratives that they have adopted, the narratives that they want to be true, when someone refutes their narrative, they consider that person to be doing something wrong. They consider that person to be in the wrong, because this person has refuted the narrative that a particular individual believes to be true, and whatever contradicts that narrative is automatically taken to be false. This puts society into a point of crisis. Because when you have this many people that can't think, and they only give their allegiance to fragmented structures that rely on narratives to navigate the world, then it puts us in a dangerous situation, because it sets the situation up so that individuals can be more easily manipulated by narratives. It's a matter of simply getting people inoculated into a fragmented structure, into a sect, and once they are pulled into this sect, to get them to adopt the narrative and to utilize narrative thinking. Because one of the things that narrative thinking does is it holds people in the binding grip of ideology structures of a particular sect. It's just like a cult. It's cult-minded thinking. Because people can't think critically, that's why they default to narrative thinking. Because in the absence of critical capacity, you're looking for a narrative that you can adapt to, that will make you feel better, that will give you some type of knowledge ability to navigate the social world. So we have a situation where we have individuals who are practicing narrative psychology, and these individuals don't have a mediation capacity. Their ability to mediate their affect systems, their emotions, is very low. And so they find themselves getting deeply annoyed or flying off the handle when their worldview is contradicted. We have more and more people who are manifesting an impulse that they are incapable of restricting themselves, and that they will lash out in violence and anger because it's a decline in intelligence. When the human primate, has a high level of intelligence, it means that the human primate has a high level of abstract capacity. This means that the primate can use words to mediate his or her social experience, to mitigate his or her feelings or emotions, so that they do not fly off the handle or become the victim of their emotion structure. But in a narrative environment, in a fragmented culture where individuals do not have this critical capacity, where individuals lack this critical capacity, this mediation process, you have a dangerous situation, because you have a bunch of individuals who are easily capable of violence because their affect structures can be more easily manipulated to launch into violence. So I think that the culture ends up being a kind of culture that has the capacity to explode into a kind of popular madness, a madness of crowds, that in the future we begin to see more and more the rise of the madness of crowds, because this individual incapacity eventually lends itself to a larger social capacity. So it's a matter of time, just a matter of time, before these individuals very likely start forming mobs, angry mobs, who have a reactionary response within the public sphere. Most likely it will be displays and activities of violence. The other thing that this puts us in danger for is to be manipulated by autocrats and dictators, by authoritarian structures, because narrative thinking is inherently authoritarian. It's not rational. It doesn't arrive at its narrative structure rationally. It doesn't navigate oppositional information by making use of rational critique, it dismisses it on the basis of the authority of its adopted narrative. So society is in greater danger of the populist being galvanized into the control or the persuasion of a autocratic authoritarian structure that the population simply goes along with because they have learned to think in terms of narrative structures. I would say that this fragmentation and this narrative thinking is itself a manifestation of a societal crisis. That whenever we find ourselves, any society finds itself in a situation where its society has disintegrated into a fragmented form and into a narrative form without critical capacity, it is in fact at a crisis, because there has to be a mediating process between these sects, between these fragments. There has to be a mediating capacity to bring these fragments together, to find a middle path that can unite individuals into larger, more democratic, deliberative bodies. And without this mediating process, then society is at the whim of the impulse structures of the individuals that make up society, is at the whim of the dogmatism of the individuals who make up the structure of society. And so the question, of course, is what exactly do we do about this? And the answer to that is we do more research, we think about it more carefully, and we try to understand the situation is with greater nuance as best we possibly can. Because therein lies our hope of being able to innovate a solution to mediate the process, the crisis. This narrative consciousness, this narrative psychology, as it should properly be called, presents itself as a tyranny in the public sphere. The individuals who are criticized, whose narratives are criticized, they feel that they are themselves personally attacked because they have been conditioned to identify themselves and their identity with the narrative structure that they believe. Because of this, any criticism that is legitimate, that is valid, that is unpersonal, but that is objective, any criticism against their desired narrative is likely to be met with a defensive resistance, where the individual seeks to attack the person who is raising the valid criticism, because individuals don't have the social and rational capacity to be able to respond to criticisms. This is a skill that a fragmented society has not learned, and that a fragmented society is lacking. The ability to respond, to rationally and intelligently respond to criticism. So instead of responding to this criticism, individuals begin to attack those who contradict their narrative structures, because they have a narrative psychology which induces them automatically toward defensiveness and an attachment to their narrative beliefs, their narrative structure. So they attack any individuals who legitimately criticize it. And the problem with this is that it means that these individuals cannot learn. This is actually a manifestation of an underdeveloped intelligence in society and in humans. The defensiveness immediately flowing into a defensiveness if our beliefs are challenged or attacked is a manifestation of an underdeveloped intelligence. It is a sign of an impairment of intelligence. Intelligence would respond to criticism by examining the nature of the criticism to see whether or not it's true, and then contrasting the power of that criticism, the accuracy of that criticism against its own beliefs to determine whether or not that criticism actually refutes one's beliefs. If it actually refutes one's beliefs, then one revises their beliefs, but not in a fragmented society that has allegiance to narrative structures, that has a disposition of a psychology of narratives. In these type of social structures, opposition is considered to be a crime simply because it disagrees with one's desired narrative, because it contradicts the narrative that one desires to be true. And so this is the situation in which we find ourselves. It's not a good situation. It is in fact very much a hostile situation and a dangerous situation. And what is required for those of us who are rational is to all the more intelligently and all the more disciplined manifest our rationality, defend our rationality, to manifest the value and the power of rationality in contrast to narrative thinking, to demonstrate that rationality has the power to emancipate individuals from their own delusion.